Statistics doesn't define your future. Welcome to the Soft Girl Era podcast, where we unlearn survival and rediscover softness, rest, and radical joy. I'm your host, LeAnne Dolce, pronounced Dolce like sweet softness whispered in French. Today, I had the opportunity to sit down with Sharhonda Richardson, a visionary who's redefining what economic power looks like for Black women across the globe. Sharhonda's work isn't just about business, it's about dismantling the narratives that tell us we're not enough, we don't have enough, and will never be enough. She's proving that statistics describe systemic barriers, not personal ceilings. And what she shared with me during our conversation, well, it's going to shift how you see your future. Let me start with the number 600,000. That's how many Black women lost their jobs in 2025. Unemployment rates for Black women hit 6.3%. The National Women's Law Center reports that Black women experience an average of 14.5 weeks of unemployment before securing a job, compared to 9.6 weeks for white men and 8.6 weeks for white women. Those numbers are real, they matter. But here's what Sharhonda Richardson wants you to understand. Those numbers describe the system's dysfunction, not your value, not your capacity, not your future. Because while those statistics were rolling in, something else was happening. Black women entrepreneurs in Canada were building businesses that generated over $90 billion in yearly revenue and employed almost 1 million people. More than 80% of Black women entrepreneurs started their businesses with personal savings. Less than 1% received venture capital funding. And yet, they built a $90 billion economic ecosystem. Let that sit for a second. $90 billion. Built with resourcefulness, community connection, and strategic focus. Built without permission from the venture capital world. Built anyway. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, that's Canada. That's not my reality. That's not my neighborhood. That's not my bank account. But here's the thing, for decades, Canadian entrepreneurship narratives centered on traditional venture backed tech startups and male dominated industries. Women entrepreneurs, particularly Black women, built their businesses largely outside these narratives, bootstrapping operations and creating sustainable enterprises. By 2023, women owned businesses represented 17.8% of Canadian small and medium sized enterprises, with their percentage continuously increasing. Yet funding disparities persisted. More than 80% of Black women entrepreneurs started businesses with personal savings, while less than 1% received venture capital funding. The venture capital ecosystem remained largely inaccessible. These entrepreneurs navigated cultural and systemic barriers that questioned their credibility and capacity. The challenge was not building viable businesses, it was securing resources to scale businesses that were already generating revenue and employment. So, what did they do? They adopted multiple strategies, bootstrapping through personal savings and reinvested revenue, building strong community networks that provided informal support and customer bases, focusing on sectors where they could establish competitive advantages, technology, clean energy, creative sectors, healthcare, and leveraging innovation as a differentiator. Here's where it gets interesting. Majority women owned firms achieved the highest overall innovation rate at 38%, exceeding both fully women owned and non women owned organizations. This innovation became a strategic asset, allowing these businesses to compete despite funding disadvantages. The result? Black women entrepreneurs in Canada built businesses that generated over $90 billion in yearly revenue and employed almost 1 million people. These businesses set the standard for innovation across multiple sectors, proving that funding access was not a prerequisite for creating economic value. They demonstrated that resourcefulness, community connection, and strategic focus could overcome systemic barriers. Now, let's talk about what happens when your business is generating revenue, but you can't scale. This is where Sharhonda Richardson's insights become even more powerful. African women drive significant entrepreneurial activity across the continent, yet their businesses often plateau despite market demand and operational viability. Research from the African Development Bank and TechPoint Africa revealed that women led ventures in Africa receive only 2 to 3% of total venture funding, despite representing a significant portion of entrepreneurial activity. Additionally, only 37% of African adult women have bank accounts compared with 48% of men, limiting participation in formal financial systems. African women entrepreneurs face multiple interconnected barriers: limited access to formal finance, constrained institutional support, underdeveloped networks, social and cultural expectations that placed additional burdens on women founders. Beyond finance, informal community based systems such as rotating savings or microcredit initiatives, while critical, could not fully compensate for systemic inequities. Many businesses stalled at the revenue stage, unable to move toward scale despite demonstrating market traction and operational viability. So, researchers developed something called the Hidden 10 Framework. This framework conceptualized business growth as a revenue to access to scale pipeline, identifying the precise stage where barriers manifest most acutely. Rather than viewing businesses stuck at the revenue stage as failures, the framework reframed them as businesses requiring strategic intervention and resource access. The key network was established to provide Black women founders across Africa and the diaspora with structured guidance, research, and frameworks enabling strategic decision making and long term growth. Accepted applicants become key holders, receiving rolling basis evaluation and access to resources designed specifically for their growth stage. By naming the systemic barriers and creating a structured pathway, the framework shifted the narrative from individual capability to systemic support. Founders gained clarity on why they were stalling and what specific resources they needed to progress. The framework enables strategic decision making by helping founders understand that their revenue generating business was proof of concept, not a ceiling. What this means is that if you're generating revenue, you've already proven your concept. You've already demonstrated market demand. You've already shown that your business works. The fact that you can't access capital or networks isn't a reflection of your business's viability, it's a reflection of systemic gaps. And once you understand that, you stop internalizing the barrier as personal failure and start strategizing around it as a systemic problem that requires a systemic solution. Let's bring this back to the soft girl era ethos. Because what Sharhonda Richardson is really talking about is releasing the cape. It's redefining strength. It's understanding that your worth is not tied to how much you hustle or how many barriers you overcome alone. It's understanding that softness in this context means strategic rest. It means knowing when to pivot. It means recognizing that the system's dysfunction is not your identity. In 2025, federal job eliminations disproportionately affected Black women who are overrepresented in federal and government positions. Black women experienced longer unemployment periods, averaging 14.5 weeks before securing employment. The economic forecast for 2026 indicated continued challenges, with tariff related job losses and federal cuts affecting women's employment overall. Black women face multiple interconnected challenges: job displacement from federal cuts, algorithmic bias in hiring software, managerial harassment, longer unemployment periods, systemic undervaluation in the workforce. The removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives made discrimination easier and reduced hiring incentives for Black women. But rather than waiting for the job market to improve, Black women implemented strategic pivots. Some utilized the National Urban League's jobs network to transition from federal roles to private sector positions that valued their administrative and policy expertise. Others moved into necessity entrepreneurship, launching businesses to create income and opportunity. The Her Agenda Breakthrough Grant specifically supported Black women scaling brands. This approach transformed job loss from a setback into a pivot point for strategic action. Black women who implemented these strategies moved from unemployment to either new employment aligned with their expertise or entrepreneurial ventures with access to growth capital. The Her Agenda Breakthrough Grant provided funding specifically designed for Black women entrepreneurs, addressing the historical funding gap. The National Urban League's Jobs Network created pathways to private sector roles that valued their experience. These solutions transformed the narrative from victimhood to agency. The accomplishment was the mobilization of resources and strategic action in response to systemic displacement. Black women who accessed the Her Agenda Breakthrough Grant gained capital to scale brands. Those who utilized the National Urban League's jobs network secured positions in growing sectors. Collectively, these actions demonstrated that economic setbacks could be reframed as opportunities for strategic repositioning and growth. What Sharhonda Richardson made clear during our Soft Girl Era podcast conversation is that economic setbacks are temporary. Your strategy and resilience are permanent. The barriers are real. The statistics are real, but they are not predictions. They are descriptions of a system that was never designed to support you. And once you understand that, you stop waiting for the system to change and you start building around it. Now, let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Because I know some of you are listening and thinking, okay, that's inspiring. But what do I actually do? First, if you're in the workforce and experiencing barriers, audit your skills and explore the National Urban League's Jobs Network or similar resources in your region. Don't assume the current job market is your only option. Your administrative expertise, your policy knowledge, your project management skills, those are transferable, and there are private sector roles that value them. You just have to know where to look. Second, if you're generating revenue in a business but feel stuck at the growth stage, research structured programs like the Key Network or the Her Agenda Breakthrough Grant that provide mentorship and capital specifically for your stage of growth. You don't need to figure this out alone. There are resources designed specifically for Black women founders who are at the access stage, who have proven their concept and need strategic support to scale. Third, if you're considering entrepreneurship, recognize that 80% of Black women entrepreneurs start with personal savings. You don't need venture capital to start. You need clarity on your market, your value, and your next strategic move. You need to understand that bootstrapping isn't a limitation, it's a strategy. And it's a strategy that has built a $90 billion economic ecosystem. The actionable challenge is this: identify one strategic action you can take this week that moves you toward your goal, regardless of current circumstances. That action might be applying for a grant, researching a professional network, launching a side venture, or pivoting your career trajectory. Don't let statistics about funding gaps, unemployment rates, or systemic barriers become your excuse for inaction. Use them as information about the system's dysfunction, not as predictions about your future. Because here's the truth: your next move determines your trajectory, not your current circumstances. African women led businesses often stall at the access stage, where they're generating revenue but lack the networks and resources to scale. This isn't failure, this is a pivot point. The Her Agenda Breakthrough Grant is actively accepting applications to help Black women scale brands. The Key Network provides structured guidance for Black women founders across Africa and the diaspora. The African Women Entrepreneurship Cooperative is launching Cohort 9. These resources exist because the ecosystem recognizes your potential. Your job is to recognize it too and take strategic action. The soft girl era is about unlearning survival and rediscovering softness, rest, and radical joy. It's about releasing the superwoman cape and redefining strength. It's about learning to say no without guilt, setting boundaries without apology, and resting without explanation. And what Sharhonda Richardson's work shows us is that this ethos applies to economic power too. You don't have to hustle yourself into the ground to prove your worth. You don't have to accept the system's barriers as personal limitations. You can build wealth, create opportunity, and scale your impact while protecting your peace. The statistics are real. 600,000 Black women lost their jobs in 2025. Unemployment rates hit 6.3%. Less than 1% of Black women entrepreneurs receive venture capital funding. But those statistics don't define your future, they define the system's limitations. And you are not limited by a broken system. You are empowered by your strategy, your resilience, and your willingness to pivot. So here's what I want you to take away from this conversation with Sharhonda Richardson. Black women are building economic power despite systemic barriers. Economic setbacks are temporary. Your strategy and resilience are permanent. And your next move determines your trajectory, not your current circumstances. I want you to stop right now and think about one thing you've been putting off because you thought you needed more money, more access, more permission. What if you didn't? What if the only thing standing between you and your next level is your willingness to move strategically with what you have right now? What if the statistics that feel like walls are actually just information about a system that doesn't know how to measure your genius? I want you to apply for that grant. I want you to reach out to that network. I want you to launch that side business. I want you to pivot that career. Not someday, this week. Because while the world is busy counting what you don't have, you're going to be building what you do. Statistics don't define your future. You do. And the world isn't just waiting for you to step into that power. The world needs you to.